Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video I'm going to talk about a budget headphone from Audio-Technica. This is the ATH-R30x, and it debuted at $99, but thanks to some tariffs and impacts on the economy, it's gone up just a little bit for $110 to $120. This is an open back 40mm dynamic driver headphone, and it has a 36 ohm impedance with a 92 decibel per milliwatt sensitivity. This thing weighs only 209 grams. It's just as light as the other headphones I reviewed for them recently, with the R50X and the R70XA coming out somewhat recently, but sooner than this one. The 40mm driver is unique to the R30X. On the R50X and R70XA, those both use a 45mm driver, and all three of these have a different impedance rating. This was sent to me for review by Audio-Technica. It won't affect what I say about it, but I always want to disclose that, and I don't do any special marketing or affiliate links with the brand. I might have a generic Amazon one like I do with all my products, but there's nothing set up with Audio-Technica, and they have no idea what I'm going to say about this headphone. I also wanted to take a quick second to say thank you all so much for the support. The channel is about to pass 100,000 subscribers, which is just mind-blowing to me. I run this channel as a hobby on the side because I work a day job, coach soccer, have kids, all that good stuff. But I love this hobby. I love making content for you all, and I'm glad to see that it's been helping some people out there. So thank you again so much for the support. Getting back to the R30X, I want to talk about what's included in the box because it's going to be rather simple here. You obviously have a box and the headphone. You will also have a rather long cable, which is not detachable because that's one of the sacrifices made that Audio-Technica was doing to try to keep the price as competitive as possible. It's a long rubber cord. There's no fancy jacket here, and you have a detachable 3.5mm to 6.5 or 6.3mm quarter-inch adapter. This is the screw-on type. Obviously, it comes in the box. I'm a little bummed out that the cables weren't detachable, but you know, if this is the only way we're going to get something in this price range from Audio-Technica on a new chassis, especially with the way the market is right now, I guess that's what it is. So let's take a look at the chassis design of the R30X because it has some similarities to the R50X and the R70XA. First, starting with the cups, this is still a metal grille, which is really nice to see at this price range because a lot of stuff tends to go more plastic. You also see the obvious use of a metal headband, which is very, very durable. This does have a telescoping yoke, so it's very easy to size to your head. Not much issue there, and they get quite large. Even though this is a relatively compact, lightweight headphone, you can see this thing gets quite big. There's also a little bit of rotation on the cups, and of course they pivot to up and down, so this will conform to fit most heads without much of an issue. The ear pads themselves have a velour fabric. They are not the deepest pads. The opening is okay, but my ears definitely kiss the baffle just a little bit. Thankfully, I am pleased to say the pads are removable, and that exposes the 40mm driver inside. Now, another thing unique to the R30X is the strap design, which looks very similar to the R70XA because it has this little tab system here for adjusting. However, on the R30X, they used a Velcro strap instead of magnets. The R70XA, when I put it on and pulled down on it to size it to fit my head, the magnets would let go and it would just pop loose, and I'd have to take it off to fix it. That's not the case with the R30X, so I'm really pleased to see that. And you still get these adjustable slots here, so you can take this off and change the clamp force a little bit, but obviously if you go to the highest setting, the strap is basically going to fit right against the metal there. So the default setting that it came in was best for me, and obviously you can size it to fit your head accordingly. If you want to make the strap even more comfortable, I am pleased to talk about today's sponsor. This is from Capra Audio. It's the Capra strap, and it retails for $20. Capra sponsored this video, and I wanted to do something different, so I decided to turn off all ad revenue from this video because I wanted to give you a commercial-free experience, and I also negotiated a coupon code, so I have zero kickbacks with this sponsorship. I decided to pass the savings on to you instead, so I wanted to do something different. If you use the code Gadgetry, it takes 10% off the store. There's no limit, so if you have a lot of headphones, get shopping because this is a pretty fun strap. It is model specific, so please pay attention to which strap you buy, and I can show you just how easy it is. So all you have to do is hook this over the band. Of course, this is the one designed for the Audio-Technica R series that just came out, in particular the R30, 50 and 70XA, and you can see it links on just like that. Once you have the strap installed, you don't really need to keep this strap on anymore, but I'm going to leave it on for the sake of this video. And you can see that it kind of just rests up against the buckle there, and you just put it on and that's it. It basically makes the headphone float on your head, and depending on which model you have, like the Hifiman Edition XS for example, that one feels too loose on my head, and the Capra strap's like a game changer for comfort. So for the cost, and if you have a headphone you love but maybe the headband not so much, this is the type of product you want to look into. As far as comfort goes on the R30X, there's a lot going for it because it's extremely light and the clamp force is rather light as well. So it has this perfect like weight to clamp ratio, if you will, making it still feel very secure on my head, but it's not like really squeezing me. So it's a good balance of both. This ear pad material is not as soft or smooth feeling as the higher end R50 and R70 models, but it's not bad. It's still very breathable because it's a velour fabric here. One of the only things I'm not crazy about with the pads on both the R30 and the R50 even is the depth is rather shallow at only 20 millimeters. So if you have larger ears, or even just my ears alone, I don't think they're the largest ears, I still just barely kiss the driver baffle a little bit. So I thought it would be more uncomfortable than it was. It's annoying to drive, you know, just to be clear, like I don't like feeling my ears against the baffle, but I never felt like I had to take them off because of it. I listened to music and gamed on these for hours at a time, Capra strap or not, and the baffle wasn't too bad for me. This thing is so light and the clamp is so light that the stock strap isn't bad. I don't want to knock the comfort out of the box. I actually think the stock comfort of this is on the higher end of comfort for anything remotely close to this price range. And I'm not saying this just because they sponsored the video, but when you take something that comfortable already and then add something like a Capra strap, the headphone kind of like disappears on the top of your head. The only thing you really feel at that point are the pads. So even on something as comfortable as this, the strap can still make a difference. Otherwise, the stock pad, I still didn't have any real issues with it. So getting into sound quality, let's start with the objective side first. And if you're new to the channel, I use a Gross KB006X Pinaclone, at least for now. And if you don't know what that means, that's fine, but it's basically a type of ear simulator, so don't compare my measurements against a different database or a different website that's sharing measurements, just because if they don't have the exact same rig and testing methodology, the numbers don't really align. This is just how one simulator hears it. I also measured the electrical impedance of this headphone because it can help explain why the frequency response or sound signature may change depending on amplifier. In this case, your change should be minimal at most because this is rated for 36 ohms. I measured basically 37 ohms, and when I looked at the spike, or where the strongest impedance was, it peaked at about 47.5 ohms at 86 hertz. So if you have a higher output impedance amp, like, you know, decent amount higher output impedance, let's say, you know, 50 plus ohms, maybe 100 ohm output impedance, something like that is going to make the headphones sound just a little bit warmer in that area. It won't be a drastic change, but if you hear a difference, it's likely because of that. Now, looking at the frequency response of the R30X, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I have a lot of subjective stuff I'll be talking about, but this has a warmer bass profile, which is kind of nice. There's a little bit of emphasis, you know, between 80 and 120 hertz, and it rolls off below 50 hertz like a lot of open back dynamics do, but not that bad. It actually still has quite a bit of body to the low bass. The mid-range is actually somewhat relaxed in comparison to the warmer bass profile, and when I compare it to the R50 and R70, it becomes apparent how relaxed this is. There is a bigger lift of treble though. My rig measures 6 to 10,000 hertz, being a fairly strong lift in treble. I hear it closer to like 7,000 hertz to 11-ish. Just a little bit higher. It's mostly noticeable between 8 and 11 for me. That's where it becomes apparent. And what happens is brass instruments can come across as a little bit harsher sounding. Someone with a lisp or like a strong trailing S, that's going to sound more noticeable on a headphone like this. It's definitely not going to hide it. The upper treble extension isn't bad. It's not like super airy like a Hifiman headphone, but it's not super condensed or cloudy sounding either. So if you're trying to avoid that whole listening to a headphone in a closet type sound, a lot of inexpensive headphones typically struggle in the high treble to have any real form of extension or air, and this has a really nice job of balancing that. Just in case you're curious, I pulled up the measurements of the R50 and R70X. So just to quickly show you objectively what the differences are, the R50 is the leanest sounding one here. It doesn't have the same warmth as the 30 or the 70, so you can see it's kind of below that line over here. And then it's stronger at 1 to 2,000 hertz, and as a result, things can come across just slightly more pinched sounding. Vocals are definitely more forward on the R50X. And when you look at the high treble, the R30 kind of stands alone. You can see that whole, 6 to 10,000 hertz area being noticeably stronger on the R30, with the R70 being the most relaxed one here. The R70 does have really nice high treble extension. It's not too strong, but it's a good balance. And when you factor in the recessed, like 4 to 6,000 hertz area, and even when you get into 10,000 hertz, the R70 is just a more relaxed listen, whereas the R30 is kind of the opposite. Even though it still has some of the warmth, it just sounds a bit more bright and energetic. All right, so moving past the measurement side and getting into just what I hear on the R30X. So let's start with the bass. The bass performance on this is definitely warm, and there's a surprising amount of sub-bass extension where it doesn't falter as much. There are some headphones that when you measure them in a vacuum, if you will, like just purely on the measurement side, you can see a similar sub-bass profile, but when you start turning it up and start listening to a lot of music, certain headphones kind of fall flat on their face, especially in the affordable open back dynamic space. The bass just doesn't kind of keep up, and it sounds limp or weak, if you will. And that's not so much the case with the R30X. Now, just to tame your expectations, this is a 40mm driver, and the way this is designed, I don't think you can EQ a huge bass shelf with this. If you're craving bass, like a lot of it, I'd consider a closeback under $150, like the FIO FT1, which I think is now up to almost $200 with the price changes. But that's typically where you go if you want a lot of bass quantity. This is more on the bass quality side, and it still far outperforms a lot of other open backs in this price range, not only purely on the warmth, but the surprising amount of impact and punch it has as well. It has really good dynamics to it. So I found it enjoyable for rock and even hip hop and EDM, you know, where the sub bass is a little bit more apparent. This still kind of shines above a lot of other headphones once that starts to happen. I also like the mid-range tuning of this a lot because it doesn't color voices or instruments much until you get into the treble, which I'll touch on in a moment. So as a result, there are some songs where the mid-range mix, if you will, let's say the voice of the lead singer is like really cutting through the mix. That voice might be a little bit harsh sounding on some headphones. So if you have a more attention-grabbing voice, if you will, the R30X kind of tames that. It's not adding to that and creating an unnecessary bite or sharpness to it. So it really is a smooth mid-range delivery, and I found that a lot of guitars, especially bass guitars, it just sounds fantastic on the R30X. When you get into the treble peak is definitely apparent, and I find that there's no getting around it. If you're familiar with a lot of songs and how they're supposed to sound, with something that's more relaxed and neutral sounding, let's say you have a Sennheiser HD 650 or 600, those aren't as forward as something like this. And when I say forward, this just comes across as a little bit sharper and a little bit harsher sounding. It's very detail forward, and when I start making comparisons to other headphones in a sec, that'll make more sense. But I think if you do a mild EQ of this, literally just if you're plugging this into something with a 10-band equalizer, take 4 decibels off of 8,000 hertz, and it's damn near perfect. And that is not a lot of work to do from an EQ standpoint to make something like this sound as good as it can. If you like a more technical, analytical, brighter sound signature, then yeah, give it a shot. That's definitely what it's intended for. But for everyday listening, even at higher volumes, that's just something I would consider doing. So I decided to bring out a lot more headphones to make some comparisons to help kind of sum this all together. And of course, I wanted to talk about the R50 and the R70XA. The R50 is definitely the leaner sounding headphone here. The bass profile doesn't have as much warmth to it, but there's similar bass extension. So if you're craving a lot of sub bass, it's still there, but I think the R30 and the R70XA just give you a little bit more of that. The imaging is a little bit more centered on the R50, partly because of how the treble is tuned. This has the least natural sounding timbre in the mid-range because it's more greatly emphasized at the 1,000 to 2,000 hertz area. So it is noticeable there, but then the upper treble is much more relaxing. So it's one of those things that you're coloring the sound a little bit, and in some cases in an unnatural way, but you're not being greeted by the same treble that might be too fatiguing to listen to. So it's just a different sound profile. I love the comfort. This particular guy has these little nuggets on the headband. It's super durable, and I love these pads. This is like the softest pad material ever. So I like a lot of things about it, but it's definitely not the most neutral sounding headphone. And then surprisingly, the R70XA is not like as analytical as you would think when you start comparing it to these guys, just because it's how it's tuned. It's a more relaxed listen, but it still stages really wide. There's really good warmth to it. And frankly, it's really hard to find a fault with the R70XA. If you're craving a hyper analytical, more detailed forward headphone, then at this price range, there are other options out there. But if you want something cozy to wear and for listening to a huge variety of genres of music, the R70XA is just great for that. It has a lot of the warmth I like from the R30, but a much more tame treble. So to me, everything just sounds great on it. It's been really fun. The only thing to point out with the R70XA is it has a 470 ohm impedance. And when I talked about measuring electrical impedance earlier, this guy passes 1,000 ohms. So you kind of need a more powerful amp, in my opinion. to get the most out of the R70XA, and high output impedance tube amp will definitely warm this up a bit. So I decided to purchase the ATH-R30X. It's an older headphone, but it's not much more than the R30, so I just wanted to compare. And I'll keep it brief. It has larger ear pads, which is cool, but they're not really any deeper than the R30, so your ears will still touch the baffle. It does feel loose and large on my head, so if you have a larger head, maybe that's the saving grace for this particular guy. I don't really see a reason to pick this over this series at all, unless the sizing characteristics make sense to you, or you just want something that sounds like its stage is wider. It loses some of the natural timbre in the mid-range. It doesn't sound as detailed or resolving, and it doesn't sound as warm either. So there's a lot of characteristics I'm not a huge fan of on this particular headphone. The only saving grace is the sizing of it, and I think just presenting things super wide if you just want something on the low price that does that. Okay, so I'm going to move these guys out of the way because we have a lot of other headphones to talk about. To me, this is the big three in the $100 space. This is the newcomer, and I really wanted to get into these three in particular. And, you know, I haven't covered the HE400 SE before. And by the way, this was sent to me from headphones.com. Huge thanks to them. It's just a loaner, just so I can hear it for a while because I wanted to hear one. This has been a fun headphone, but I'll be honest, it pretty much gets wrecked by the other three in a lot of areas. This has good resolution and speed. Its stage is pretty wide. It's probably the widest, comparably so, staging headphone here, but it sounds super compressed, and the bass, even though like at a low volume you hear the bass, it just sounds a little bit lifeless. If you already have this headphone, it's not a bad headphone. I'm not telling you it's a horrible headphone. It's just when you start listening to the other three, you know, when I expect the bass to be there, even if I EQ it up, you hear the bass, but it sounds weak, and it sounds like it's struggling to give you the impact that you're craving when the song's really starting to deliver it. I don't mind the overall tuning of this. I think the biggest issue, it just sounds very compressed and lacks a lot of dynamics. So if you're on the fence of a new headphone, if you want to say you have a planar magnetic, great, but I think the dynamics just do it better in this price. I would go all the way up to the, you know, Sundara or the Edition XS if you want to get into a Hifiman planar, in my opinion. Now you get the Sennheiser HD599, which is an older headphone, but the price is fantastic for this particular model. It's just about $100 as well. And I purchased this one too, mainly for this review, but just to kind of compare and also to keep growing my measurement database. This is really comfortable. It's clampier by far than the R30, so it squeezes your head more, but the pads are larger and they're deeper, so I have really good ear comfort with some sacrifice to pressure on my head. Going into sound quality though, this has a similar amount of warmth, but this actually builds into the mid-range a little bit more than the R30. The HD599 has a slight hint of boxiness and thickness to it, and when you follow that up with even more relaxed mid-range, it can sound a little bit dull and a little bit less clear. It sounds, that's basically the best way to describe it. It just doesn't sound as resolving, but I really do like the tonality of it. As with typical Sennheiser, they really do get a good natural presentation of stuff. The big killer with me is it just doesn't sound as clear. So if you're trying to get something that sounds more high res, more analytical, yes, this has much more treble, but it is more resolving, so there's that going for it. It actually has a pretty good bass impact as well, and it's noticeable even when you compare it to the HE400 SE. So the Sennheiser open backs in this price aren't typically known as like bass monsters or anything, but it definitely sounded better than what I got from the planar. I think the R30X just has a little bit more detail in the bass. You can have a little bit more deep bass extension, but also bass texture. So overall, I really like the bass delivery of the R30X the most. Then you have the Philips SHP 9500, which is just an absurd value at about $70 at the time of filming this. That price is crazy, and even if it fluctuates up to like 80, 90, I still think it's a great deal. I'm just going to get right to it. So the things I'm not crazy about with this headphone is the ear pad material. It's a little bit scratchier, and even though it's light and the pads are huge, they're not really deep, so my ear does still touch the baffle, but the clamp isn't that strong. So it's actually still pretty comfortable to wear. I just don't like the skin feel of the pad material as much as I do on the Audio-Technica or the Sennheiser. So when it comes to the sound signature, this has a good amount of bass performance, but it's definitely on the leaner side. It doesn't have the same warmth as the Sennheiser 599 or the R30X. So it's a little bit cleaner, but I think the mid-range and treble tuning is absolutely fantastic on this. I don't think it has the same overhead for detail retrieval. It sounds a little bit less resolving and clear than the R30X, but the tuning of the mid-range and treble is absolutely fantastic. So if you want something more neutral sounding and you're okay with giving up some of the warmth, I think this is the best alternative under, let's say, $130, $150 to the R30X. To me, these two are the top in each respective price range. The R30's advantage, again, really comes in the bass department, where there's just certain genres that I didn't quite enjoy on this just because I wanted more bass than this was able to deliver. Okay, so I moved a few headphones out of the way because this chapter is all about gaming. And if you don't care about this part, just skip the chapter to the end where I give you my final thoughts. So the R30X at about $110, give or take, is one of the best gaming experiences you can get right now, period. It really showcases how fast you get diminishing returns in gaming. So I wanted to start with that. The clarity and resolution you get with that bass impact, and because it naturally rolls off, it works great for both immersive gaming and FPS gaming. I have fantastic imaging performance with this headphone, so no real complaints there. To translate some of the issues that you have with this treble lift, when you're shooting a sniper, anything that has a strong metallic sound, if you're breaking glass, airstrikes, those types of things are louder on this particular headphone because it's more emphasized in that treble area. So if you can take 4 decibels off of 8 kilohertz, basically fixes that problem, and now you have all the bass performance and the super high clarity and resolution that the R30 has. I think the HD99 is a little bit better for immersive gaming, but in FPS gaming, it's definitely outgunned by the R30X and the Philips. And the SHP 9500 is easily the only one to compete with this guy below $120 that I've heard. I've tried a lot of headphones out there, and there's pros and cons, but these two really represent diminishing returns very quickly in gaming. I feel super competitive with either of these. Now, if you want that extra few percent competitive edge, that's where the R50X comes in. And the tuning of this being a little bit more forward at 1 to 2000 kilohertz actually helps with the footstep performance in FPS gaming. It is a little bit leaner in bass, so I would still pick the R30X or the R70XA especially for immersive gaming, but the strength here is the imaging and competitive play. Obviously, it's an open back, so it's not going to block out exterior noises. None of these guys will. But man, even when you're running by yourself, that image, the footstep is so precise and centered and clear. It just really helps you laser focus on audio cues. And it doesn't sound like super wide and soundscapey, if you will. But the footsteps you hear or audio cues you hear, loot crates, special perks or whatever you're looking for in the game, you can pinpoint it super, super easily with the R50. It's not like a drastic difference. I'll still win with this, no problem, but this just seems to do it with a little bit less effort. And then you have the R70XA, which to me is a good balance of being good for competitive gaming, but also for immersive gaming. It has really nice warmth, a nice wide stage and presentation to it, and everything just sounds fantastic, honestly. I mean, it's more expensive, so you're going to get that. That's basically the price of both of these combined, almost. So it's a wonderful headphone. It doesn't sound as bright or detail forward as either of these in FPS gaming. It sounds more relaxed, but I can still easily pinpoint everything I'm looking for. And I really enjoy gaming on it, to be honest. It's one of my favorites. So the only other one I didn't physically bring out is the Sennheiser HD560S. Wonderful FPS headphone. My only issue with the 560S is it's very clampy, and I can't wear it for a long period of time because it puts a lot of pressure here, which has always been a problem with me for headphones. But the sound quality of that is definitely up there with some of the best. It's the only other one that would really rival the R50X in FPS gaming. I think those two are the cream of the crop right now, and followed very closely by the R30 and the SHP 9500. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of where the value stacks up in gaming. All right, so that wraps up the review. And to summarize, I think the R30X is an exceptional value. You just have to know a couple really specific gotchas going into it. And if you do that, I think you'll love it. One is the pad size and depth. If you have larger ears or you don't like feeling that sensation on your ears, that's something to consider. And the other one is if you are sensitive to that treble, either know that you should embrace some EQ. It'll really go a long way with this. Otherwise, just accept that it's going to be a little bit brighter if you don't have the ability to do EQ. It is wonderfully competent in this price range. The fact that it has the kind of bass quality that it does, overall performance and detail retrieval that a lot of other headphones don't have, and the fact that it makes some other headphones that were considered really good in this price range sound more dead, less detailed, more compressed. It really is bringing more of the high-end audiophile sound to a lower price point with a couple trade-offs. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see you at the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye.